squatters took over a widow's home. What bikers did when they arrived was absolutely brilliant. The autumn leaves were falling in golden cascades around Margaret Sullivan's Victorian home on Maple Avenue, painting a picture of suburban tranquility that couldn't have been further from the truth. Inside that beautiful three-story house with its wraparound porch and carefully tended gardens, a nightmare was unfolding that would shock the small town of Riverside Falls and eventually capture the attention of the entire nation. Margaret Sullivan was 76 years old, a retired librarian who had lived in Riverside Falls her entire life. She had been born in the local hospital, attended the town's schools, worked at the public library for 43 years, and raised 2 children in the very house that was now at the center of a crisis that seemed to have no solution. Her husband Daniel had passed away 18 months earlier after a brief battle with heart disease, leaving Margaret alone in the house that had been their sanctuary for over 5 decades. The house itself was more than just a building. It was a repository of memories, a testament to a life well lived. Every room held stories. The kitchen where she and Daniel had cooked Sunday dinners for their children and grandchildren. The living room where they had celebrated Christmases and birthdays. The bedroom where Daniel had taken his last breath while holding her hand. The garden that Daniel had spent years perfecting, with rose bushes he had planted for each of their anniversaries. This wasn't just property to Margaret. It was the physical embodiment of everything she had loved and lost. Margaret's 2 children, Robert and Lisa, had moved away years ago. Robert to Seattle, where he worked in tech, and Lisa to Boston, where she practiced law. They called regularly, visited when they could, but they had their own lives, their own families, their own obligations. Margaret understood and never complained. But the truth was that after Daniel died, the loneliness in that big house sometimes felt suffocating. Her neighbors had been wonderful, especially the Johnsons next door, who checked on her regularly and helped with heavy chores. But Margaret was determined to maintain her independence for as long as possible. She drove herself to the grocery store, managed her own finances, kept up with the house maintenance, and stayed active in her church and the local library's volunteer program. She wasn't ready to give up her home or her autonomy, not yet. The trouble had started 3 months ago when Margaret fell and broke her hip while working in her garden. It was a serious injury for a woman her age, requiring surgery and an extended hospital stay, followed by several weeks in a rehabilitation facility. During those 2 months away from home, Margaret's house sat empty, and that's when the vultures descended. The squatters arrived during her second week in rehab. There were 4 of them. Initially, a man named Travis, who appeared to be the leader, his girlfriend Crystal, and 2 other men who went by the names of Jake and Diesel. They had somehow obtained keys to Margaret's house, though she would never learn exactly how, possibly from a corrupt contractor she had hired before her fall, possibly through some other means. What mattered was that by the time Margaret was well enough to come home, these people had taken over her house completely. When Margaret's son Robert drove her home from the rehabilitation facility, they found the locks changed and strangers living in her house. Travis answered the door, wearing Daniel's favorite cardigan, the one Margaret had been saving because it still smelled like her husband's cologne. The sight of this stranger wearing her dead husband's clothes nearly broke her. "Can I help you?" Travis had asked, with mock politeness, as if Margaret were the intruder. "This is my house," Margaret said, her voice shaking with shock and anger. "What are you doing here? Get out immediately." "I don't know what you're talking about, lady," Travis replied with a smirk that made Robert's blood boil. "We rent this place, got a lease and everything. You must be confused. Before we start the story, let me know. Do you like this voice, or should I change it?" "All right then. Let's get into the story." He shut the door in their faces. When Robert tried to force his way in, Travis called the police, claiming that strangers were trying to break into his home. The responding officers were sympathetic, but explained that this was a civil matter, not a criminal one. If the squatters claimed to have a lease, even a fraudulent one, it would take time to sort out in court. They couldn't simply remove them. What followed were 2 months of bureaucratic hell that nearly destroyed Margaret's will to live. The legal system moved with agonizing slowness, each hearing delayed, each motion filed, generating another response that had to be addressed. Margaret's lawyer explained that squatters' rights laws were complex, that even obvious fraud took time to prove in court, that the wheels of justice ground slowly, but they did grind. Meanwhile, Margaret was homeless. She stayed with the Johnsons at first, then rotated between friends from church, feeling like an increasingly burdensome guest despite everyone's kind reassurances. Robert wanted her to come to Seattle, but Margaret refused to leave town while strangers lived in her house, wore her husband's clothes, slept in her bed, and destroyed everything she held dear. Because they were destroying it, Margaret would drive by the house daily, torturing herself with glimpses of her former life being demolished. The garden Daniel had loved was overgrown and trampled, trash piled up in the yard. The beautiful front porch where she and Daniel had spent summer evenings was now covered with broken furniture and beer bottles. Loud music blared at all hours. Neighbors reported drug activity and constant traffic of unsavory characters coming and going at all hours. The squatters had grown bolder and more numerous. Travis had apparently invited more of his friends to move in. Neighbors counted at least 8 different people living in the house at various times. They were running some kind of operation from Margaret's home. Whether drugs, stolen goods, or some other illegal activity, no one was quite sure. But it was clear that every day they remained, more damage was being done to the property and to the neighborhood. The police were frustrated, but tied by the legal system. "Our hands are tied until the court says otherwise," the sympathetic officer told Margaret. "I know it's wrong, I know it's your house, but legally, we have to wait for the eviction order." Margaret felt betrayed by the system she had trusted her entire life. She had paid her taxes, followed every law, been a model citizen for 7 decades. And now criminals were living in her house while she slept on friends' couches, and the legal system told her to be patient. Her health began to deteriorate under the stress. She developed anxiety that required medication. She couldn't sleep without nightmares about her house being destroyed. She lost weight because food tasted like ashes in her mouth. Her children were desperately worried, especially when she started talking about just selling the house to the squatters for whatever they'd pay, just to end the nightmare. "Mom, no," Lisa said firmly during one of their daily phone calls. "That's your home, Dad's home. We can't let them steal it from you." "I'm too tired to fight anymore," Margaret admitted, and the defeat in her voice broke Lisa's heart. "They've won. The system is on their side. I just want some peace." That's when the Johnsons next door decided to take matters into their own hands, or rather, to put those matters in the hands of people who might be able to help where the legal system could not. Tom Johnson's nephew was a man named Derek Wrench Morrison, a longtime member of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. The Iron Brotherhood wasn't affiliated with the Hells Angels or any other national organization. They were an independent club that had been part of Riverside Falls for over 30 years. They had a complicated reputation. To some, they were troublemakers and criminals. To others, they were protectors of the community, men who lived by their own code, but who also looked after the vulnerable and stood up to bullies. Tom called Derek and explained the situation with Margaret. "This woman is 76 years old, Derek. She's a pillar of this community, worked at the library for decades, always kind to everyone, and now these parasites are living in her house while she's homeless. The police say their hands are tied. The courts are taking forever. She's giving up, and it's killing us to watch." Derek listened carefully, asked questions, and then said, "Let me talk to the guys. We'll see what we can do." 3 days later, on a crisp Saturday morning in October, Margaret was having coffee with Susan Johnson when they heard it, the distinctive rumble of multiple motorcycles approaching. Margaret looked out the window and felt her heart skip a beat. There had to be at least 50 motorcycles pulling up in front of her house, maybe more, all of them ridden by men in leather vests bearing the Iron Brotherhood patch. "What's happening?" Margaret asked, confused and a little frightened. Tom Johnson appeared at the door with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a different era. Derek Wrench Morrison, tall and powerfully built, probably in his early 50s, with long hair pulled back in a ponytail, a full beard going grey, and arms covered in tattoos. But his eyes were kind, and when he spoke to Margaret, his voice was respectful and gentle. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Derek Morrison. Tom here is my uncle, and he told me about your situation. My brothers and we'd like to help if you'll let us." "Help how?" Margaret asked cautiously. "The police said, 'Ma'am, with all due respect, the police are playing by a rule book that doesn't account for scum like the people in your house," Derek said bluntly. "Now, we're law-abiding citizens, mostly, and we're not going to do anything illegal. But we are going to use some creative problem-solving that the authorities might not have considered. Do we have your permission to proceed?" "Proceed with what?" Margaret asked. Derek smiled, and it was the smile of a man with a plan. "You'll see. Just trust us." What happened over the next 72 hours would become the stuff of local legend, a masterclass in creative problem-solving that skirted the edge of legality without quite crossing it, and a demonstration of the kind of community justice that happens when the official systems fail. The bikers began with a simple strategy. They surrounded Margaret's house, not threatening, not violent, just present. 50 motorcycles parked on the street, in driveways, on lawns, with neighbors' permission, of course. The bikers set up lawn chairs and settled in for what was clearly going to be an extended stay. They were calm, polite, and absolutely immovable. The squatters looked out the windows at the sea of leather and chrome and realized they might have a problem. Travis came out onto the porch, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "What do you want?" he demanded. Derek stepped forward, flanked by several large, intimidating brothers. "We want you to leave Mrs. Sullivan's house. Today would be good. Right now would be better." "We have rights," Travis blustered. "We have a lease. You can't make us leave." "You're absolutely right," Derek agreed pleasantly. "We can't make you leave. We can't touch you, can't threaten you, can't do anything that would give the police reason to arrest us. But here's what we can do. We can be here all day, every day for as long as it takes. We can watch, we can document, we can make sure every person who comes and goes from this house is photographed and their license plates recorded. We can make sure that every illegal activity, and I'm guessing there are quite a few happening in there, gets reported to the proper authorities with detailed evidence. Travis's face went pale. You're harassing us. No, we're exercising our First Amendment right to peacefully assemble in a public space, Derek corrected. We're concerned citizens keeping an eye on suspicious activity in our community. Nothing illegal about that. Another biker, a man called Hammer, who served as the club's sergeant-at-arms, stepped forward. Here's the thing, friend. You're clearly running some kind of operation out of this house. Might be drugs, might be stolen goods, might be something else. Now, the local police have been trying to build a case, but they don't have enough evidence yet. Funny thing is, with 50 sets of eyes watching this house 24/7, I bet that evidence is going to pile up real quick. Every visitor, every transaction, every suspicious package, all documented, time-stamped, and ready to hand over to law enforcement. A third biker, known as Poet because of his unexpected love of literature, added, and then there's the matter of the property damage. See, Mrs. Sullivan has friends who are contractors, inspectors, insurance adjusters. They're going to do a complete assessment of every bit of damage you've done to this house. Every broken fixture, every stain, every hole in the wall, every destroyed piece of property. That's going to add up to tens of thousands of dollars. Destruction of property is a criminal charge, not a civil matter. That means jail time, not just court dates. Derek continued. So here's the deal we're offering, and it's more generous than you deserve. You leave today, right now, and we forget we ever saw you. You walk away clean, no charges, no police, no legal consequences. Or you stay, and we make absolutely certain that every crime you've committed gets thoroughly documented and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Your choice, but you've got exactly 1 hour to decide. Travis tried to argue, tried to assert his supposed rights, but his voice lacked conviction. He went back inside, and the bikers waited. True to their word, they were peaceful and law-abiding. They sat in their lawn chairs, drank coffee from thermoses, and waited with the infinite patience of men who had nowhere else they needed to be. Inside the house, panic was setting in. Crystal was crying, saying she didn't want to go to jail. Jake and Diesel were arguing about whose idea this had been in the first place. The other squatters who had moved in were grabbing their possessions and sneaking out the back door, not wanting any part of whatever was about to happen. But Derek had anticipated that. More bikers were stationed at every exit, not blocking them, but documenting everyone who left, photographing faces, recording license plates, creating a comprehensive record that could be turned over to authorities if needed. 45 minutes into the hour deadline, Travis made his decision. The front door opened, and the squatters began carrying out their belongings, which notably included many items that belonged to Margaret. Derek stopped Travis as he tried to load Daniel's favorite cardigan into a duffel bag. "That's not yours," Derek said quietly but firmly. "How do you know?" Travis challenged. "Because Mrs. Sullivan is standing right there, and she's telling me it belonged to her late husband," Derek replied, pointing to where Margaret stood with the Johnsons, tears streaming down her face. "Now you can give it back voluntarily, or we can add theft to the list of charges we're compiling. Your choice." Travis threw the cardigan on the ground and stalked to his car. Over the next hour, all of the squatters cleared out, leaving behind a house that was damaged and dirty, but finally empty of the people who had stolen it. But the bikers weren't done. Once the squatters were gone, Derek turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, I need to be honest with you about what we're going to find in there. Based on what we observed, they were definitely dealing drugs from your home. There's probably paraphernalia, possibly contamination, that will require professional cleaning. You shouldn't go in until we've assessed the situation and made it safe." Two members of the club who had professional experience. One was a licensed contractor. Another was a former cop who knew what to look for. Entered the house to do an initial assessment. What they found was heartbreaking. The beautiful home Margaret had maintained for decades was trashed. Holes punched in walls, carpets stained and burned, appliances broken, every room bearing evidence of neglect and abuse. The squatters had used one bedroom as a drug lab of some kind, leaving behind chemical residue that would require professional hazmat cleanup. Margaret saw the photographs and broke down completely. "It's destroyed," she sobbed. "Everything Daniel and I built, everything we loved, it's all destroyed." Derek knelt beside her chair, his expression gentle despite his intimidating appearance. "Mrs. Sullivan, the house isn't destroyed. It's damaged, yes, but it can be fixed. And my brothers and we are going to help you fix it." "I can't afford," Margaret began, but Derek cut her off. "You don't understand, ma'am. We're not asking you to pay. This is what we do. We take care of our community, especially people like you who've given so much to this town. You're going to let us help you, and that's final." Over the next 6 weeks, Margaret's house underwent a transformation that left the entire neighborhood in awe. The Iron Brotherhood mobilized resources that seemed almost miraculous. They had members who were contractors, electricians, plumbers, painters, and craftsmen of all kinds. They also had connections to suppliers who donated materials at cost or sometimes for free once they heard the story. The drug-contaminated room was professionally cleaned by a hazmat team, paid for by the club's community fund that they maintained for exactly these kinds of situations. Damaged drywall was replaced, holes were patched, walls were repainted. The destroyed carpet was ripped out and replaced with beautiful hardwood flooring that one of the brothers had been storing in his warehouse. Broken appliances were replaced with newer models. The destroyed furniture was replaced with pieces donated by club members and community members who heard about the project. But the bikers did more than just repair damage. They upgraded things that Margaret and Daniel had been meaning to fix for years, but never got around to. They replaced the old, drafty windows with energy-efficient ones. They updated the electrical system to modern code. They renovated the kitchen with new cabinets and countertops. They fixed the roof that had been leaking in one corner. They rebuilt the front porch, making it even more beautiful than before. And the garden, Daniel's beloved garden, received special attention. Several of the bikers' wives and girlfriends, it turned out, were avid gardeners. They carefully revived the damaged rose bushes, replanted the trampled flower beds, restored the vegetable garden, and even added new features, including a beautiful memorial bench with a plaque that read, "In memory of Daniel Sullivan, who tended this garden with love." The bikers worked every evening and all day on weekends. They brought in crews of 20 or 30 at a time, turning what would have been months of work into weeks. And they did it with a cheerfulness and dedication that brought tears to Margaret's eyes every time she visited the work site. The community rallied too. Neighbors brought food for the workers. Local businesses donated materials. The story had spread through Riverside Falls like wildfire, and people were inspired by both the injustice Margaret had suffered and the extraordinary response from the motorcycle club. The narrative that bikers were dangerous criminals was being replaced by a new understanding. These were men and women who stood up for the vulnerable, who fought for justice when the system failed, who took care of their community. Local media picked up the story, and it spread beyond Riverside Falls. Bikers reclaim home from squatters, read one headline. Motorcycle Club restores widow's house. After legal system fails her, read another. The story went viral on social media, with millions of people sharing it and commenting on the bikers' innovative approach to a problem that had seemed unsolvable. Legal experts were interviewed about the tactics the Iron Brotherhood had used. They operated in a grey area, one lawyer explained, but they never crossed the line into illegality. They used peaceful assembly, legal documentation, and the implicit threat of exposure to accomplish what the courts were taking months to do. It's brilliant, actually, if ethically complicated. The squatters, meanwhile, faced consequences. The evidence the bikers had gathered was turned over to police, leading to arrests on drug charges, theft charges, and property destruction charges. Travis and several others were facing significant prison time. The fraudulent lease they had produced was proven to be a forgery, and the person who had created it was also arrested. 6 weeks after the bikers first arrived, Margaret Sullivan walked back into her home for the first time. Derek and Tom Johnson escorted her up the newly rebuilt front steps, across the restored porch, and through the front door. Margaret stopped just inside the entrance and gasped. The house was beautiful, not just repaired, but renewed. Every room had been restored and improved. Her furniture, what could be saved, had been professionally cleaned and restored. The pieces that were beyond repair had been replaced with items that matched the home's Victorian character. Photographs that had been damaged were professionally restored and framed. Even Daniel's cardigan, which had been thrown in the dirt by Travis, had been cleaned and was now displayed in a shadow box with a photo of Daniel wearing it. I can't... Margaret couldn't find words. She walked from room to room, touching walls, running her hands over countertops, looking at all the work that had been done with such care and love. When she reached the bedroom she had shared with Daniel, she found that the bikers had somehow located the exact same wallpaper pattern she and Daniel had chosen 40 years ago and had restored the room to look exactly as it had in their happiest days. She broke down sobbing, and Derek stood awkwardly nearby, clearly uncomfortable with tears, but understanding them. We wanted you to feel like you were coming home, ma'am, not just to a repaired house, but to the home you built with your husband. Why did you... Margaret couldn't articulate the questions. Derek sat down on the restored window seat, choosing his words carefully. Mrs. Sullivan, the world looks at guys like us and sees criminals and troublemakers. Sometimes they're right. We are not all angels, and we live by our own rules sometimes. But we also have a code. We protect the vulnerable. We stand up to bullies. We take care of our community. When we heard what happened to you, how these parasites stole your home, and the system was too slow to help you, we knew we had to do something, not just because it was wrong, but because you represent everything good about this town. You spent 43 years helping people at that library, teaching kids to read, running programs, being kind to everyone. That matters. Good people deserve to be protected and honored. He stood up, looking out the window at the restored garden. My mom was a librarian too, small town in Idaho. She was a lot like you, kind, generous, always helping others. When she got sick with cancer, the community took care of her, made sure she had everything she needed. I was just a kid, but I never forgot that. Never forgot what it meant that people looked after her. So when I heard about you, I thought about my mom, and I knew we had to help. Margaret hugged him, this fierce-looking biker with a gentle heart, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for seeing me, for helping me, for giving me back my home and my hope." The housewarming party that evening was unlike anything Riverside Falls had ever seen. The Iron Brotherhood was there in force, along with what seemed like half the town. Neighbors, friends from church, library colleagues, local business owners, and even the police officers who had been so frustrated by their inability to help through official channels. Robert and Lisa had flown in to surprise their mother, and they spent the evening shaking hands with bikers and thanking them with tears in their eyes for what they had done for their mother. "We didn't know how to help her," Lisa admitted to Derek. "The legal system was failing her. She was giving up, and we felt helpless. What you did, it's beyond anything we could have imagined." Derek shrugged off the praise. "We just did what anyone should do. The system failed, so we found another way." The local police chief, a man named Henderson, who had been on the force for 25 years, approached Derek privately. "What you did, Morrison, it was legally questionable in some respects, but I'll be damned if it wasn't also completely brilliant. Those squatters had been running drugs and stolen goods through that house for weeks, and we couldn't touch them until we had enough evidence. You handed us everything we needed on a silver platter." "Glad we could help, Chief," Derek said with a slight smile. "Off the record," Henderson continued, "the way you handled that situation, the restraint your guys showed, the intelligence behind the strategy, that was impressive. You could have gone in there and beat those punks bloody, and half this town would have cheered. But you didn't. You used your heads instead of your fists. That shows real leadership." The story continued to spread nationally in the weeks following Margaret's return home. It was featured on news programs, discussed on talk shows, and became a viral sensation online. The Iron Brotherhood found themselves in the unexpected position of being celebrated as heroes and innovators. Other motorcycle clubs reached out, asking about their tactics and strategies for helping community members facing similar situations. Apparently, squatting had become an epidemic in many areas, with homeowners finding themselves helpless against people who exploited loopholes in tenant protection laws to steal homes. The Iron Brotherhood's approach offered a template for how to address the problem when legal remedies were too slow. Derek gave several interviews, always deflecting attention from himself to the broader issue. "The problem isn't that we did something special," he told one reporter. "The problem is that the legal system moves so slowly that criminals can exploit the delays to victimize innocent people. Mrs. Sullivan did everything right, owned her home, paid her taxes, was a model citizen, and she still ended up homeless while criminals lived in her house. That's broken. The system needs to be fixed so that people like Mrs. Sullivan don't have to rely on people like us to get justice." The story also sparked a conversation about stereotypes and judgments. Comment sections and social media were full of people admitting they had prejudged bikers based on appearance and were reconsidering their assumptions. Teachers used the story in classes to discuss the dangers of stereotyping. Community organizers referenced it when talking about alternative justice systems and community-based solutions to problems. Margaret became something of a celebrity herself, though she was uncomfortable with the attention. She did a few interviews, always emphasizing the kindness of the Iron Brotherhood and the importance of community. "These men saved me," she said simply. "When the system failed, when I had given up hope, they stepped in and gave me back everything I thought I had lost. They're heroes, every single one of them." The Iron Brotherhood established a fund to help other homeowners dealing with squatters, using donations that poured in from across the country after the story went viral. Within 6 months, they had helped 17 other families reclaim their homes using variations of the tactics that had worked for Margaret. The bikers also formalized their community service efforts, creating the Iron Brotherhood Community Protection Program. They offered their services, always free of charge, to vulnerable community members facing various crises. Elderly people being scammed, domestic violence victims needing protection, families being harassed by criminals, small business owners being extorted. The program became a model that other clubs adopted across the country. Margaret lived in her restored home for another 8 years, surrounded by the love of family, friends, and her protective biker guardian angels. The Iron Brotherhood checked on her regularly, and she became a beloved figure in the club, the grandmother everyone adopted. She attended their charity events, cooked for their fundraisers, and treated their children with the same kindness she had shown generations of kids at the library. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 84, her funeral was attended by over 500 people, including nearly every member of the Iron Brotherhood. They served as pallbearers, escorted her casket to the cemetery on their motorcycles, and made sure she was buried next to Daniel in a ceremony that honored both her life and their commitment to her memory. Derek gave the eulogy, his voice rough with emotion. Margaret Sullivan taught us something important. She taught us that real strength isn't about how tough you are or how hard you can hit. Real strength is about being kind in a cruel world, about giving your whole life to serving others, about maintaining grace and dignity even when people steal from you and the system fails you. She was 4'11" and barely weighed 100 pounds, but she was tougher than any of us. And when she needed help, we were honored to provide it. Not because she was weak, she was never weak, but because strong people deserve to be protected and celebrated. He paused, looking out at the assembled mourners. Mrs. Sullivan made each of us promise that we'd continue the work we started when we helped her. She made us swear that we'd keep protecting people who needed it, keep standing up to bullies and criminals, keep being the men our mothers raised us to be, even if the world saw us as something different. We kept that promise while she was alive, and we'll keep it now that she's gone. That's her legacy. Not just a life well lived, but a movement she inspired to protect the vulnerable and fight for justice when the system fails. In her will, Margaret left a substantial donation to the Iron Brotherhood Community Protection Program, ensuring that her belief in their mission would continue to fund their work, helping others. She also left the house, her beloved home that had been stolen and then restored, to a non-profit that provided housing to displaced elderly people, with the stipulation that the Iron Brotherhood be given first opportunity to help with any maintenance or repairs needed. The restored Victorian home on Maple Avenue became a symbol in Riverside Falls, a physical reminder of what could happen when good people refused to accept injustice and when communities came together to protect their most vulnerable members. Tours were given occasionally, with all proceeds going to the community fund, and every visitor heard the story of Margaret Sullivan and the bikers who saved her home. Years later, when Derek Morrison was interviewed for a documentary about the Iron Brotherhood and their community work, he was asked what he was most proud of in all his years with the club. Without hesitation, he answered, "Helping Mrs. Sullivan." Not because it was the most dramatic thing we ever did or the most complicated, but because it was so clearly right. She needed help. We had the ability to provide it, and we did. That's what it's all about. Using whatever power you have to protect people who need protecting. Everything else is just noise. The interviewer asked if he ever regretted the morally grey tactics they had used, the way they had skirted the edge of legality to achieve their goal. Derek thought for a long moment before answering. The law is important. Order is important. I'm not advocating for vigilante justice or mob rule. But I am saying that when the legal system moves so slowly that innocent people suffer while waiting for justice, someone has to step in. We didn't break any laws helping Mrs. Sullivan. We used legal tactics in creative ways. We documented crimes and turned evidence over to authorities. We used peaceful assembly and the power of presence. Was it intimidating? Sure. But so is having your home stolen and being told you have to wait months for the courts to sort it out. Sometimes being intimidating in the service of justice is exactly what's needed. The documentary became a hit, spawning think pieces and debates about community justice, the role of alternative organizations in filling gaps left by official systems, and the complexities of judging people based on appearance rather than actions. Law schools used the case as an example in classes about property rights, squatters' rights, and the intersection of legal and extra-legal justice systems. But for the people of Riverside Falls, the story was simpler and more personal. It was about Margaret Sullivan, beloved librarian and pillar of the community, who had been victimized by criminals and failed by the system. It was about the Iron Brotherhood, the tough-looking bikers who proved that heroes come in all forms. It was about a community that came together to right a wrong. And it was about the power of refusing to accept injustice, even when the official channels failed to provide recourse. The bench in Margaret's garden, the one with Daniel's memorial plaque, became a gathering place for the community. People would sit there and remember the woman who had taught so many of them to read, who had recommended books that changed their lives, who had been kind to everyone she met. And they would remember the lesson she had taught in her final years, that goodness deserves to be protected, that community means taking care of each other, and that sometimes justice requires creativity, courage, and a willingness to challenge assumptions about who can be a hero. On the anniversary of the day, the bikers reclaimed Margaret's home. The Iron Brotherhood holds an annual ride through Riverside Falls, ending at the Victorian House on Maple Avenue. They place flowers on the memorial bench. They share stories about Margaret, and they recommit themselves to the mission she inspired, protecting the vulnerable, standing up to bullies, and being the kind of men and women who make their communities better simply by being part of them. And every year, someone new hears the story for the first time and has their assumptions challenged, their heart opened, and their understanding deepened about what it means to be a hero, what it means to serve your community, and what it means to see people for who they really are, rather than what they appear to be on the surface. That's the real brilliance of what the bikers did when they arrived at Margaret Sullivan's home that October morning. They didn't just reclaim a house from squatters. They reclaimed faith in humanity. They reclaimed the idea that good people don't have to be helpless victims. And they reclaimed the truth that strength, courage, and compassion can come from the most unexpected sources. Margaret Sullivan's story became more than a viral news item or a feel-good tale. It became a reminder that we all have the power to help, that systems are made by people and can be challenged by people when they fail, and that sometimes the scariest-looking strangers can become your greatest allies if you look past the leather and the tattoos to see the hearts underneath. If this story inspired you, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about courage, community, and unexpected heroes. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that good people still exist and that justice can prevail even when the system fails. Because Margaret's lesson matters more than ever. We are all responsible for protecting each other. And when we do, miracles happen. Thank you for watching, and remember, never judge by appearances, always stand up for what's right, and never underestimate the power of community to overcome injustice. Start your own conversation.